name is Joel Rosenberg, and I'm honored to join my colleagues today as one of the founding members of the Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem. I think it's a very important new organization, and I think it's coming at a really critical moment in the evangelical conversation about how do you handle some of the most controversial and complex issues on the planet. We are, as you know, approaching the 70th anniversary of the rebirth of Israel on May 14th, 1948. And for many, this will be a season of thanksgiving to the God of Israel, who made ancient promises to the Jewish people and is keeping those promises in modern times. It's really something quite extraordinary. For others, however, this will be a season of pain, perhaps resentment, even anger for what they regard as al-Nakba, the disaster, the catastrophe. For presidents, for prime ministers, for kings and their counselors, this is a season to try again to broker a just and comprehensive planned peace treaty to resolve this conflict. And the question is, what season is it for the church? How should Christians approach this historic yet highly controversial year? What do evangelical Christians in particular believe about Israel, about the Palestinians, about the peace process? Where are they getting their information from? What are the gaps in their knowledge? How can followers of the Prince of Peace be effective ambassadors for peace and reconciliation in the Middle East, as we're called to be, and perhaps hopefully not inadvertently not become agents of more division and discord? What does it mean to obey Jesus' command to love our neighbors and love our enemies? Always challenging, and particularly challenging in that part of the world. And as importantly, how can Christians discuss hot-button theological and geopolitical issues in a thoughtful, respectful, biblical manner that builds the kind of unity that Jesus speaks of in John chapter 17 without causing more discord and division? These are important questions. These are questions that have drawn me to say, yes, I want to be part of the Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem. And I think it's precisely the kind of conversation that the evangelical church, the broader church, and actually the culture needs to be having. Now, I'd like to comment on the survey in a moment. Let me just put a few cards on the table. By heritage, I'm Jewish on my father's side, and I'm Gentile on my mom's side. By faith, I am an evangelical. I'm a follower of Jesus. I believe that Jesus is, in fact, the Jewish Messiah and the light of the world. By age, I am a Gen Xer. I was born in April of 1967. By citizenship, I'm a dual U.S. Israeli citizen, having recently made Aliyah. By residence, I am now a Jerusalemite. My wife and family and I moved from the Washington, D.C. area, and we now live with our sons, not just in Israel, but in Jerusalem. So I can assure you that these are not theoretical discussions in our home. This is personal. Never have I been more committed to praying for the peace of Jerusalem and educating the church about the importance of praying for the peace of Jerusalem and discussing these issues in a thoughtful, respectful, John 17 unifying way as I feel right now, and since moving to a part of the world that I call the epicenter. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to my colleagues here. I'm grateful to Lifeway Research for this groundbreaking survey. I've been traveling in and out of the Middle East, in and through Jerusalem for more than 30 years, or for 30 years actually this year. And I've never seen a survey that was as detailed and really drilled down on these issues as this. And it was, I'm very, very encouraged. I find the data is fascinating. And I believe that pastors and ministry leaders, Bible college and university professors, presidents, students, lay leaders, the media, and even members of government, and even foreign governments, will find this data interesting and compelling and useful to them, particularly as we head into this momentous year. Now, there is good news here, and it's very good, and I want to draw 3 points. I'm going to abbreviate some of it because my colleagues have covered some of it. But first, and I think for me the biggest takeaway is this. Despite all the beatings that Israel has taken in the media, in academia, from various replacement theologians and pastors and so forth, the survey reveals that American evangelicals still have a remarkably deep love for Israel and the Jewish people. That is not insignificant because we have had a barrage of very consistent and concentrated attack against the legitimacy of the state of Israel, and yet evangelical support is still really remarkably high. Indeed, I would say one of the headlines for me is this. The survey overwhelmingly confirms that the people of Israel have no better or more loyal friends in the United States than evangelical Christians. And I think that's very, very important. We've mentioned here that, again, I want to underscore it without going into a lot of detail, but 8 in 10 American evangelicals believe that the Abrahamic covenant was a promise that God made for all time, that it was unconditional, that it wasn't just for 4,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, that it's as current as today's headlines. That is a huge number, especially when you think of the consistent attack. And I think we all believe that Israel isn't always being discussed, even in churches. The Abrahamic covenant is not always being taught. In fact, that would be a separate study, but I'm actually kind of shocked by how high that number is. It means the Abrahamic covenant and those eternal, unconditional promises are very deep in the evangelical soul and mind, in spite of all kinds of attack. So that's fascinating. Again, the fact that I teach a lot on Bible prophecy, and I can tell you prophecy is not a topic that most evangelicals want to talk about. 27% of the Bible is prophecy, but you'd find it very difficult to find the vast majority of pastors and theologians teaching on the topic. Why? Because a number of reasons, one of which is so many evangelicals believe that there are lunatics dealing with the topic, and they're always date setting and it's all kinds of nuttiness, and that's true. And so the fact that 80% of American evangelicals believe that the rebirth of the state of Israel in 1948 was not just biblically significant, but actually the fulfillment or the beginnings of the fulfillment of Bible prophecy is enormously significant, because those who do teach prophecy don't always remember that most of the church does not. So where are evangelicals getting this deep belief? We're watching something big happening. This isn't just political or geopolitical. This is prophetic and thus significant. I would maintain that the church isn't teaching that overall, and therefore the fact that people believe it, 8 in 10, is a big deal, and including millennials. Yes, less, but they're not getting this teaching almost at all. So that is very, very significant. Again, the fact that nearly 8 in 10, 76% of evangelicals, believe that Christians should support the Jewish people's right to live in a sovereign state of Israel is a big deal. Now, again, let me underscore this. The survey makes clear that evangelical Christians of all ages, ethnicities, income levels, and regions of the country overwhelmingly believe that God made certain binding promises to Abraham and his descendants to make them a nation, to give them a land, to make them a blessing to the rest of the world. They believe that these are binding promises. What's more, they believe that God is keeping those promises. And I think that part of the discussion that we need to have in the church is if you look at Israel as a political issue, you're going to have deep division. And it is a political issue, and so there will be those divisions. I get that. But the church ought to be starting from the perspective of what does the Bible say about it? And when you ask that question, I think theologians may be very well out of sync with, the vast majority of evangelicals. Now, none of us believe that polling should drive the church. Don't misunderstand that now we're be a poll-driven church. No, that's not true. But it is just there's a disconnect between theologians, not all obvious, but many, and what the church actually believes. And so having the conversation is important. But again, 80% of evangelicals believe promises were made, promises are being kept, and that really goes to the heart, not of politics, but of the character of God. Who is our God? And when he makes a promise, how does he handle that over time? So this is tremendously encouraging. And honestly, I think as you're hearing, this is surprisingly so to all of us that these numbers are as high as they are. So that's the first thing. Second, the survey found that American evangelicals not only love Israel, but they want to obey Jesus' command to love their neighbors. This is a big deal. 59%, as was mentioned, 59% of evangelicals believe that Christians should do more to love and care for the Palestinian people. And fully 2 out of 3 millennials believe this concept. Now, this is not what you normally hear in pro-Israel circles in evangelicalism. It just isn't. I'll deal with that in a moment. But one other fact, 73% of evangelicals in the survey say they are concerned for the safety of our Christian brothers and sisters in areas controlled by the Palestinian Authority. I believe these reflect, again, this goes to me, this is not based on that the church is necessarily doing a good job teaching, hey, by the way, there are Palestinian Arabs who love Jesus, and shouldn't we love them and know them and how can we help them, protect them, encourage them? I don't think the church is necessarily teaching that by and large. I think this goes to the deep-rooted theological belief that Jesus said, love your neighbors, so, we should love our neighbors. Look, from my perspective, far too often in the evangelical church, we hear an either-or tone to the topic of Israel and the Palestinians and Arabs generally. Either Christian leaders describe themselves as loving Israelis, or they love Palestinians and the Arabs in the region, Jordanians, Egyptians. But all too often, that either-or tone is they don't talk at all about the other side, or they speak about it, again, too often, not always by any means, but too often with disrespect, with sometimes derision, with an edge that makes it sound like we're for these people and we're really against these people, or we're not going to spend much time talking about them. That is not the heart of God. None of us in this alliance believe that's the heart of God. We believe that God loves Israel. We believe God loves Palestinians and Jordanians and Egyptians and Syrians and Lebanese and Iraqis and everybody in that region, for God so loved the world. And Jesus, as a Jew walking through the land of Israel, kept saying, love your neighbors. Well, they're not neighbors. They're enemies. Okay? Then love your enemies. Oh, come on, Lord. That covers everybody. Exactly. And the question is, how is the church going to do that? So that's, I think, the critical issue. The last point I would just make very briefly, and that is what really encouraged me, the third headline for me is that American evangelicals aren't convinced that they understand enough about God's plan and purposes for Israel, and so they want to know more. And we saw in the survey that no fewer than 7 in 10 American evangelicals say they want to know more about God's, what the Bible teaches about Israel's future. So I'm encouraged. Last point I would say is this is the more challenging news, is the point that Mitch made about millennials, and Scott made as well. Millennials are sending the church a sobering message. They're not against Israel, not yet, not at all. But the survey makes clear that many of them really don't understand Israel's place in the biblical narrative, and thus their support for Israel is nearly 20 points lower than their parents or grandparents. Now, if you extrapolate that forward, unless the church gives younger believers a healthy, balanced, solidly biblical understanding of God's love and plan for Israel, overall evangelical support for the Jewish state could very well plummet over the next decade as millennials represent an increasingly larger percentage of the church. So I'm cautiously optimistic about the future, cautiously. But I believe the Alliance for the Peace of Jerusalem has got a lot of work ahead of us, and I hope that from this early formation that the tribe will increase. So let me stop there.